You can get it done quick, you can get it done cheap, or you can get it done well, you know, but you can't get all three. So at some point, then you got to pick your poison.
Welcome to another episode of Young Entrepreneurs with the Green Roof team. My name is Nelson Fernandez, your host, and we're joined by one of our managers here at the Green Roof team, Tanner Clark. How are you doing today, Tanner?
I'm doing well. It was a little chilly today, but warmer than yesterday.
Yeah, I know the snow is going to come in pretty hard coming up soon as we're approaching winter. Yeah, so kicking today's episode off, for everyone out there listening, we're pulling a topic from an amazing book, The Entrepreneur Mind, written by Kevin Johnson. Today's topic is covering act in spite of how you feel. So Tanner, I want to kick off as a quote. It comes from a 20th century philosopher, Vernon Howard, and it goes along the lines of, a clear understanding of negative emotions dismisses them. Does this ring any bells for you? Make you think of anything specific?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind when I hear that quote is that it really drives home the importance of paying attention to our negative emotions first and foremost. I think a lot of us by nature and by habit wants to really discard and ignore our negative emotions because we like to act that, there aren't issues or everything's fine. You just got to like power through or whatever. But it's important to acknowledge them and to ask the question why, try and get to the root cause of why am I feeling these negative emotions? Because most of the time I would say it's your body trying to tell you something, sometimes it's more like, our monkey brain, as you will, telling us to avoid stress, like run away from the tiger or whatever. So, of course, that's not always appropriate for our modern civilization. Sometimes we experience stresses and those are okay. We're not in immediate danger, but we still need to acknowledge that before, like the quote says, we can dismiss it. And sometimes there are actual legitimate causes for negative emotion, in which case we should address those causes, right? We should do something to eliminate them, solve them, so that then we can carry on. So often they're important, and I don't think you ever just want to ignore them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like when you said the word monkey, made me think about something more primal. Think back when they're like cave people and the sapiens.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of survival.
Yeah, because if you think about it, way back when we weren't necessarily at the top of the food chain, right? The individuals who didn't respond immediately to those stresses and to those causes of stress, they didn't last. So they definitely, it serves your purpose not to think about things, but especially in this day and age, that's often not the case. We don't just want to react blindly or act based solely upon our emotions. We want to first analyze and then act. Then we can dismiss the emotion.
Yeah, similar to, I would say, like, how do you overcome overthinking? Like in the past, overthinking was a good survival method, but now, as you're saying, being able to take that step back, think about what's going on, and finding the best way can help overcome these, I would say, emotional driven decisions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We never want to get caught in analysis paralysis either. So, thinking all the time, thinking much too thoroughly, but then never actually acting based on anything. That's one of my frequent things that I need to pay attention to, is to know when enough is enough. There's been enough research, there's been enough thinking. I'm confident enough in my decisions, because we don't want to act based without thinking, but we can't know everything either. We're going to make mistakes, and that's okay, but you just keep going and you learn, sort of like the last episode we were talking about, failure and learning from those lessons. So it's a large balance in many of those respects. It actually kind of tying together the analysis paralysis and negative emotions, specifically fear. It kind of reminds me of your fight or flight response, but there's at least a third response to that, and that's just to stiffen up like a board, and to freeze there. And that's a survival tactic as well, because I believe like predators and big cats, for example, they don't always chase if you're still. Their instinct won't kick in, right? You even think about like your house cat or whatever. It's playing with the toy that like you're jiggling around, first and foremost. So it's the motion that excites. So sometimes it is a survival instinct to freeze there and to not move. But that can translate today into failing to act when there's anxiety, which often isn't what you want to do. You want to be able to process. So it's just being aware of these things your body may instinctually or habitually do, so that then you can take actions to mitigate those responses.
Awesome sauce. So going in more of a engineering driven conversation, taking what we've been talking about and thinking about your experience with the blade kit and more the material side, do you see or experience at times, especially being a new subject relatively, how to move forward and how to develop that scope?
Yeah. So especially regarding materials, I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of engineering materials. So how do you sort through them all? I know both you and I took at least one class on materials selection, but that's really just, is the tip of the iceberg, right? You're barely scratching the surface there. People will spend an entire career building up experience and knowledge within like fields and subfields of materials, types of materials, different applications for them, right? So when do you know enough to act and actually, let the rubber hit the road? I would say, especially regarding materials and regarding a lot of engineering design choices, you really just can't beat testing and doing it yourself and just trying it and seeing what happens. Because you can research stuff for as long as you want, right? But you still just won't learn as much until you do it yourself and you do it physically or with a really, really good model. But, especially with materials, just working with the materials gives you a much deeper understanding. So then that becomes the question of, okay, do I have the time and do I have the money and resources to test all these things? Right. So thinking about, when do I act? How soon is too soon? You definitely have to consider cost in mind. I don't think there's a one size fits all sort of thing. So for the blade kit and for trying those and trying things out, I think initially I was pretty hesitant. We were talking about carbon fiber, right? Because it's pretty much it's a hype material. You think it's going to be expensive. And then I was looking into it and it really wasn't ridiculous, what we were getting for that price. And we had the means to get it. So at that point, it's like, okay, we don't need to be super stingy with this material. So let's just buy it and go for it. There's no point wasting time when we can just spend some money. You can never forget about the the importance that is your time, because that's a limited resource. You can make more money, you can't make more time, right? So buying things to save time, like buying materials and running those tests, that can definitely be worth it. So I would bear those things in mind whenever you're deciding between like researching, preparing more, or just going for it. What are the consequences of failure? Because if there's no harm, there's no foul.
And that actually makes me think the way that you said time, resources, money makes you think about a mechanic. And his story is I was listening to, I think, the other week. And for him, someone came in with a car and they actually had a couple of repairs on it. So they're asking about like, oh, how much do you think it would cost? How long do you think it's going to take? And essentially his thinking was, okay, if you want it done fast and cheap, might not be the best job. But if you want it done really well and put in a good amount of materials, it's going to take some time. Like there's always that trade-off between time, cost, resources, any given point.
Yeah, oftentimes within a company, I think it's a balance between your costs, because you roll like materials, resources into that, the quality of your product, and time. Now, time also correlates a lot to cost, because labor, if you're paying in terms of time, that is actually a cost. But we're talking about costs in respect to the customer, like your lead times for one thing. If you're going back to the car example, the lead time is going to be for the customer how long it's going to take to get this fixed, right? So yeah, you can get it done quick, you can get it done cheap, or you can get it done well, but you can't get all three. So at some point, then you got to pick your poison, and that can become a business question too. There are different thoughts on how you balance that within a product, within your market. It depends a lot upon what kind of good or service you provide and what kind of market you're in. What is the customer expecting? Engineering wise, things over the years have gotten more towards quality, especially over the latter half of the 20th century. We think a lot about like Toyota, the Toyota production system, how they really stepped up the level of manufacturing engineering to get out quality products to the customer. So now people kind of take some of that for granted in some respects. So then, you're left with time. We are very much a convenience-based sort of economy, So a lot of people want things done quicker and cheaper too, depending on the economic conditions. So these are all more business things. If you want to relate that to engineering, though, of course, you think of the voice of the customer, and you're thinking about, say a house of quality or customer requirements for your product. Because, if you want to design something just for the sake of designing it, learning and enjoying yourself, that's great, but if you want to design a product that somebody really uses, you have to think about that end result first and foremost, right? What is the goal I'm trying to get at? How am I trying to balance your time, your quality, your cost? How does that translate to other like physical parameters of the design, the materials, the geometry, the function that you're serving, So I always think it's important to have that holistic perspective. And from there, once you've got that figured out, then you can dive deeper, But otherwise, you run the risk of getting caught and lost in the weeds, and then you're stuck with an analysis paralysis, and we're back to where we started.
Yep. And I like the way that you're describing it. similar to the pillars of project management, the time, resources, finance side, and the customer satisfaction all comes together for quality. And I see that being a quite, I would say, more behavioral shift where you're focusing on that logical side. So in that big picture on acting in spite on how you feel, there's that emotional side and that behavioral side. So Tanner, when it comes to, I would say after you had maybe a long day's work or coming towards the end of how much energy you have at a time, and it comes between a decision, do you feel like you lean more towards that emotional side or that behavioral side?
So this is tough, right? Because we started talking about, listening to our emotions, listening to what they can tell you, but just because you are acknowledging and listening to them doesn't mean that you act on them. Doesn't mean that you behave solely based upon how you're feeling and how your emotions are, So the author of the book, he brings up sleep deprivation in this section. So, those are important things to listen to, your sleep. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you performing basically those? Are you maintaining your health is a really good way of putting it, because we can fast for a little while, right? We can go a little while without eating. We can skimp on sleep for a little while. We can get into a sleep debt, and we can do all right, especially as owners, who have responsibility within a process or a project. And when we have people who are relying upon us, whether it's our colleagues or our customers, sometimes delivering a great product is prioritizing their needs above your own, right? And that can get you a lot, but I would always caution and say that it can't get you far to be working solely based on that mindset, right? So sometimes we need to act in spite of how we feel and just behave in the ideal way, but at the same time that can also catch up to you. And if you are relying upon that too much, there may come a day where opportunity is knocking and you are physically unable to answer that, because you're not in good health, right? So acknowledging those emotions is important. You don't always have to act based on them, but it's something that you need to keep in the back of your mind. You always have to consider it too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The emotional side plays a big part. When I think about, say, decision making, 3 factors I take into account is it ethical? How does it affect people emotionally? Then how does it affect people logically? Try and keep logic at the tail end of it, because that emotional side can play a big part in it, that pathos side of it.
Mm-hmm.
After sleep deprivation, for example, emotions can be running high.
Yeah.
One example I did want to bring up was last May 2022 when we were doing the wind turbine installation. Long day, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
So, can you describe how at 4 points during the day, beginning of the day, right before lunch, right after lunch, and towards the end, kind of like how your morale was, how the team morale was, and maybe how easy decision making was?
Mm-hmm. So, beginning of the day, before lunch, after lunch, and towards the end. That was what you're saying? Okay. I'm trying to remember throughout that. So, see, this stuff is tricky for me in some respects, because I will feel like I'm fine. So maybe like I just like subconsciously like quell a lot of those emotions or frustrations, because, when a project rolls out, you can plan all you want. Things don't go to plan, so you've got to be improvising, coming up with plan B, thinking on your feet, pivoting to get the job done and just rolling with it, rolling with the punches. So yeah, tensions can run high in all that, but it's important to acknowledge that. So then, once again, you can dismiss it and you can think logically and you can let cooler heads prevail. It's hard for me to sometimes to acknowledge that stuff though, because I guess without going on too terribly long of a tangent, like that's just a lot of habits that I learned from how I worked, with a lot of my family members, in particular my father, So I mean that's how I started out working. I worked with him doing a lot of different things, lawn care, odd job. We'd sell firewood, like you name it, we did it, right? So we would work all day long virtually. If it was an all day thing, we would typically stop for lunch, but sometimes we'd work through lunch. Just because that's how my father was. It's still really how he is in a lot of ways. And I just picked up on a lot of those things and those habits, then I started working for other guys, so like I would do some similar work with my principal back in high school. So he had a rental property and I would like clear brush out of that, right? And I would just be going and going and going or whatever. And he's like, you can take breaks and stuff. You can grab some water, you can chill out for a little while, but like that just never occurred to me, it's not in my nature. Because it's just not what I learned, not what I was around. So there's still always that part of me too, like in my day job with Green Roof Team. So like I'll just go and sometimes I run the risk of not asking myself, not thinking, do I need to rest? Or does the team need to rest is another important thing too. So that is something that I could work on for sure. Just being more aware of, how does morale go throughout the day? Looking back, if I had to guess, I bet we were getting hungry. So we took a break. We went to the student center, grabbed lunch. We were probably feeling a little better after that, but like we were also probably getting sluggish after taking the break and eating too. Then by the end, we were probably wanting to wrap up and get done. So we were pushing, hurrying. But I mean, overall, what do I remember from the experience? I remember the excitement of it and seeing like a project come to fruition that we had all worked very hard on. And just feeling the pride in that ownership is the things I take away from it, right? So we ran the gamut of feelings that day, right? But acknowledge that, so you can set those emotions aside and think logically. But another great way of thinking about it is to think, how great is this going to be when I'm done? What am I going to remember of this? Am I going to remember being angry and impatient with people because like they weren't getting my ideas, or like frustrated with myself because I'm not doing my own things right? Or am I going to remember looking back and working with my friends and making a project that was something greater than anything I could have done by myself? So I like to hold on to those things. I like to imagine and hold the vision through the challenges and through the tough times in any project, because striving for that goal is the best part. It's the process of pursuing the thing, not even the thing itself. But those moments are where you find out what you're made of, and you really form those great bonds with people. So
wise words, Tanner.
Yeah.
So
I try, I guess.
Yeah, pretty spot on. All right. Yeah, definitely I can agree more. Like pushing through, especially at the end, seeing something come to life, no better feeling. Especially knowing a quote. Actually, I don't know if it's a quote, but there's a saying that I live by. You don't remember what people may say in the past, but you'll remember how they made you feel.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really true.
So, coming towards the end of today's episode, Tanner, do you have any suggestions or tips on how someone can think maybe more behavioral instead of going to emotional instincts, or maybe feel more courageous during these times of high stress?
Yeah. I would highly encourage anyone who wants to become better at handling their emotions and acting in stressful situations to push themselves and to really test their limits. I think an excellent place to start with that is within your physical limits. And I would try physically tough tasks because that's going to make you mentally tough too. It's going to give you a little bit of mental grit. A great example of this that I think you and I can both relate to is running and racing, like foot races, you know. So for me, the big thing in high school was the half mile and the 800. And those were some of the moments where I was probably the most like in pain in my entire life. You know, like my lungs, my legs are on fire. My body is just screaming at me to stop. But you always find out that you are made of so much more than what your mind thinks you're capable of. Right? So I would challenge anyone to find some way to really push their limits. Do something that you don't know whether you can do or not. Because that fear of not knowing, that fear of failure is also a huge driver. And it's important to know that like facing failure and failing is okay, like we've talked about before. So I would definitely recommend physical things. I would recommend anything that can instill a discipline and a mental toughness in someone so that you can learn more about your body, you can learn more about your mind, you can put yourself in stressful situations where you're feeling a lot of mixed negative emotions, and you learn to handle that so that you become a more resilient person to whatever life throws you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just practicing how to leave your comfort zone, using the strengths you do have to help propel yourself up, welcoming that failure. Couldn't agree more, Tanner. Thank you for coming on to the show today.
It's my pleasure, as always.
And for everyone listening, we encourage you to go listen to another episode. Rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcastings. Visit our website, follow us on social media. Come join the Green Room Team experience. And remember, folks, stay sustainable.